Back now to Dermot Murnaghan. This time he's in a virtual reality Downing Street, and he's going to show us just how difficult, if not impossible, it is for William Hague to win tonight's election.
We'll be talking about the task facing William Hague as he seeks to make number 10 here his new home. To put it into a historical context, we thought we'd show you the size of swings that former Prime Ministers won when they came to power and the majorities that they won then. So let's start with Winston Churchill in 1951. He had one of the shortest journeys into number 10. He needed a swing of just over 1%, 1.1%, to take the Conservatives back into power, and he won a majority of 17. Now, the further away we get from this door, the bigger the swing it took. So, in 1964, Labour's Harold Wilson needed to travel further to get into power. It took a swing of over 3% of Conservative voters to Labour to take him into power, although even then he had a majority of just 5. Now, what about 1979? Margaret Thatcher's first victory, of course. She was some distance from number 10 going into the election. The swing from Labour to Conservative then was over 5%, which gave her a majority of 43. And the biggest swing since the war was Tony Blair's at the last election, 1997. Over 10% of Conservative voters switched to Labour, giving Mr. Blair that massive majority, the one he's defending tonight, of 179. So those historical swings emphasize the huge task, maybe insurmountable task, facing William Hague this year. He needs a swing of, get this, of 11.5%, bigger than all those we've just seen, just to give him a majority of a single MP. So he'll have to do better than all these Prime Ministers. Look at this: Winston Churchill, Harold Wilson, Margaret Thatcher, and Tony Blair to win the keys to number 10 tonight.
Thanks, Dermot. We go down now to our results centre down there, and Bob Worcester from Moray. Bob, this question of turnout, can you, through the polls, put it into some kind of perspective for us?
Well, it's a combination of things, of course. It's some apathy, it's some antagonism. I believe that the turnout is low in Chris Mullin's seat and seats like Chris Mullin because of old Labour. About 12% of people identify themselves as, quote, old Labour as opposed to new Labour, according to a survey we've done for The Economist that will be published tomorrow. And those people have had every incentive to vote in 1997 for Chris Mullin and everybody like Chris Mullin because they'd been in the wilderness for 17 long years. They were hoping for a socialist, a Labour government, an old Labour government. They didn't get one. And so I think that there was very little incentive for them to turn out to give Tony Blair more encouragement to continue with new Labour policies. I think that's the principal reason that we have in a seat like that.
Do you get anything, just on young people? We heard a lot in this campaign that young people, for a variety of reasons, weren't going to vote, didn't think it was worth voting, etc. Do you have a handle on that?
I certainly do. This is the 9th election that I've worked in this country on politics and general elections, and for 9 elections I've heard about the young people and how enthusiastic they are, how turned off they are. And I remember Harold Wilson, for whom I did private polling back in the 70s, turning to me one night on election night and saying to me that he was disappointed that the 18 to 21-year-olds were given the vote because he'd given it to them and the buggers didn't use it. Now, I do have the final figures. We've now finished our 14,500 interviews. Of course, they continued to be interviewed by the Moray exit poll people right up until 10 o'clock at the close of voting. And our final share of the vote figures are 31% for the Conservatives, 44% for Labour, and 19% for the Liberal Democrats. And it nudged up our estimate from the 175 that you announced at 10 o'clock to 183, but not much in it, really not much in it, and well within the band that I gave you when you went to me before.
Thank you very much, Bob. Now for an election update down to the Results Centre and Mary Nightingale.
Jonathan, we are predicting a Labour landslide by 175 seats. As you can see, this is based on a Moray exit poll. Too early yet to be based on results. Just one result in, as you know, Sunderland South, but a majority of 175 nonetheless. Now, if we have a look in more detail at our House of Commons prediction, with that majority of 175 that we're predicting, you can see that would give Labour 417, well beyond that crucial 330 mark, beyond which any party needs to pass to be assured of a majority. The Conservatives well behind on 154. The Lib Dems on 58, that's 12 more than last time, and the rest on 30. So how are they responding in their particular parties? Well, John Prescott, the Deputy Prime Minister, says such a result would reflect the good campaign we've run. Less positive, however, over in the Conservative camp. Michael Portillo says, I would very much hope that whatever happens, William Hague will continue as leader. Meanwhile, in the Lib Dems, their leader, Charles Kennedy, says if the exit poll is true, that really is terrific. Well, that's the way it's looking down here, Jonathan. Now let's get a reminder of how you can get more details in your own constituencies.
Well, we heard that, but we also have from Mr. Hague's spokesman, an official, saying that Mr. Hague is looking very optimistic and upbeat, which shows, if nothing else, that Mr. Hague is as resilient as he's seemed all through this campaign. Now we can go up to the Sedgefield constituency in Trimdon Labour Club, and I can see there Bill Neely. What's it like up there, Bill?
Well, very noisy here at the Trimdon Labour Club, where 18 years ago a young man, 30 years old, called Tony Blair, walked in here looking for a seat. He'll be back here tonight to claim victory, and Labour virtually claiming victory right now. Alistair Campbell told me about an hour ago we are going to win, and win with quite a big majority. It is a strong mandate for the next 5 years. Quite a lot of tactical voting has been going on, he says, and he confirms that apathy has been quite a big factor. Labour will lose some seats, he says, and some good people. It would be unbelievable, he told me, if we had maintained the same majority. So certainly in those comments, a hint that Labour's majority will go down a little, but certainly that's a landslide by anyone's reckoning. And in fact, Tony Blair spent about 6 hours today working on a reshuffle. 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening, working on lists of those to be promoted and those to be demoted. No names, but some of those names really are an open secret. Names like David Blunkett, almost certain to be promoted to Home Secretary. That reshuffle will be announced tomorrow, so Labour tonight not just confident, we haven't heard champagne corks popping, but not just confident, actually claiming victory here.
Bill, they'll be glad to hear Bob Worcester just saying now that on all the exit poll completed, although it's only marginal, he is actually upping the Labour majority a touch to 183 instead of that, which will put them over the 179. I take that with a lot of caution, but they're going to like hearing that, aren't they?
They will like hearing that, although I have to tell you, after 4 weeks of being with Tony Blair, he really doesn't like polls, you know. He's very, very suspicious of them. Now, you can see why he did that during the campaign, because he didn't want to inflate people's ideas of what the majority might be. He wanted to keep it low. He wanted people out, to drive them out to the polling stations. It looks like, as you said, that hasn't happened in such great numbers, that turnout is down. Alistair Campbell is acknowledging as much, that the turnout is lower than before, but I think that kind of majority they'll be very, very pleased with.
Bill, thank you very much. John, pick up on this thought that it's business as usual. We just heard Bill saying that they're already working on the cabinet. I mean, of course they knew deep down that they were very unlikely to lose this election. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think, there's an argument about, why are they going to do this tomorrow, which is when we expect the reshuffle to take place. And the reason for that is you can't have, say, David Blunkett going on as Education Secretary for 3 days. They have to move quickly, and of course, they've had plenty of time to think about it, not just today, but for weeks. Tony Blair has been thinking about it. When I talked to him before the election started, it was clear already his mind was on the reshuffle.
Thank you very much. We can now go up to Fife North East in Scotland, where Mingus Campbell, the elder statesman, who doesn't mind being called an elder statesman of the Liberal Democrats, is waiting. Mr. Campbell, we're giving you, on the basis of the exit poll, of course, only 58 seats. Does that square with your assessment?
Well, 58 seats would be a great time for Charles Kennedy. As you know, this was his first campaign as leader. He's been generally reckoned to have fought the best campaign. And if we've gone up from 46, which was what we got in 1997, to 58, Charles Kennedy and everyone round about him will be able to count that as a very considerable triumph.
He talked a lot in the campaign about being the real party of opposition. Now, if the result is as it appears to be, one of the big issues after, in the next few months, is going to be Europe. how is he going to be able to claim to be the party of opposition on Europe?
Well, he's been talking about constructive opposition. By that he means that where the government is embarked on a course of action of which we disapprove, which we think is not in the interest of the people of the United Kingdom, we'll be robust in our opposition to that. But if the government is going to put forward the case for the single European currency in a way which we believe they ought to have been doing through the course of the last 4 years, then they can expect to have our support. Just as John Major got our support in the 92-97 Parliament, when it was Liberal Democrat votes which enabled him to get the ratification of the Maastricht Treaty through the House of Commons. If it's in the interest of the people of the United Kingdom, any government can look to have Liberal Democrat support.
Do you take the thought that a lot of commentators have been making, that the Liberal Democrats now are very clearly the left-wing party? They're the nearest you can get to a version of old Labour.
Well, I mean, do I look like old Labour, I have to say? What I think is important to recognise is that these rather traditional and perhaps rather stereotyped descriptions of people and parties are much less applicable now than they ever were. People right across the political spectrum now in Britain recognise if you want good health and good education and you want to provide properly for pensioners, then you've got to be willing to spend money. And for that purpose, moderate, targeted tax increases in taxation are the only sensible ways. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, no, I didn't want to interrupt you. Just a brief thought before I move on.
Yes.
The turnout, which we're saying is around only a little over 60% at best. What's your quick response to that?
Well, I'm very disappointed by that, and it would square with my own experience going round polling stations in the course of today. As the chairman of my constituency association said to me a week ago, there's not the same kind of snap in this election as there was the last time round. Politicians of all parties have got to do, as Charles Kennedy's been urging, reconnect politics and politicians with the people of the United Kingdom. Otherwise, we can look forward to even lower polls in the future.
Ming Campbell, thank you very much for joining us. And now we can go back to Dermot's virtual area where you'll find him on a UK map.
Now, during this campaign, we've seen all the political parties targeting certain key regions, which they think can make a big difference for them tonight. For example, if I walk down to the West Midlands, this is one of the regions the Conservatives know they must do well in if they're to have any hope of getting back into power. So if we bring up the results of 97, we can see just how badly the Conservatives were beaten here then. Labour ended up with 44 seats, the Conservatives just 14, and the Lib Dems 1. Now, if we look at the change of seats in 1997, we'll see what a victory that was for Labour. They gained 15 seats while the Tories lost 17. A disastrous defeat for them, clearly. And they'll be looking to win a lot of these key marginals back tonight. And here's what voters in one of those key marginals, that of Birmingham Edgbaston, said about the campaign today.
They're all quite good. They're all sticking to their own points of view, Labour and Conservative and the Liberal. I don't know whether there's much between them all, to be quite honest.
I suppose the honesty is with which the Liberal Democrats deliver their policies. I think that's been a refreshing change, because I think the other two parties are too busy bickering at each other all the time.
I voted Labour because I want to give them a second chance to rectify the bits they didn't do first time around. And after that, I might change my mind.
So the West Midlands, a key region, will be keeping a close eye on tonight.
Thanks, Dermot. We are now predicting a majority on the basis of our exit poll of 183. There's only one real result in from Sunderland South, which we've heard, but a 183 majority, if it turns out to be right, that would be 4 more seats for Labour than they had in the landslide in 1997, which would be an astonishing result, and equally, as we are predicting, a disaster for the Conservative Party. Now we can go up to Ross, Skye and Inverness, where I can see Mark Webster, and also Richmond in North Yorkshire with Juliet Bremner, who's with William Hague's campaign. But first, Mark Webster, what's Charles Kennedy up to? Can you tell us, Mark?
Well, he's just left to travel the 70-odd miles here to where the count is taking place. I'm actually in the Tulloch Castle Hotel, where these good people here are all Liberal Democrat supporters, and they're obviously delighted with what looks like a very good performance by the Liberal Democrats in our exit poll. Now, it was certainly within the bounds of what they'd hoped for, but certainly towards the upper end of any sort of expectations they had in terms of the number of seats. And perhaps you've got a time just to talk, because I've interrupted your drinking here and celebrating. I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's obviously our exit poll indicates you're going to make quite reasonable gains.
Yes, we hope.
Why do you think that?
Because we worked very hard for this.
It's hard work. Can I ask you the same, perhaps? I mean, certainly the campaign was actually very well received in some quarters, wasn't it?
Well, I think so.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps some of the others are a bit more talkative. Perhaps I could ask the lady over there on the far side. What do you think, then? What do you think was, in the end, that you seem to have done rather towards the upward end of your expectations?
Perhaps the gentleman could speak much better.
Well, I think that the general appeal of particularly Charles Kennedy just comes across as a very personable and a very kind of, you know, just a human being. And in the Highlands of Scotland especially, I think that responds very well. And that's echoed in, you know, the fact that he's been here for so long now.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I mean, I think you get some sort of cross-section anyway. I mean, I think what they're thinking is that the fact that they didn't involve in the kind of personal politics was a good thing.
Mark, rather stunned response to the apparent size of the victory that we're predicting for the Liberal Democrats, or increase in their seats. You covered the campaign with him all the time. How did you assess his campaign techniques and style?
Well, I think what came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people is that initially it was seen that Charles Kennedy, who was dismissed as chat show Charlie, political lightweight, did actually manage to stick very much to his guns. That he was relatively little known at the start of the campaign. The question Charles who wasn't that uncommon. But now, according to their polling, they've got 90+% recognition of Charles Kennedy as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, which obviously is very much what they wanted. And the fact, well, cheered somebody up, clearly that, plus the fact that he stuck by this honesty factor, I think, which was terribly important for them. You know, they said they're not the sort of people to get involved in the sort of, you know, the mudslinging that the other parties did, and that's played in their favour.
Mark, thank you. And now to Richmond, where Juliet Bremner has been following Mr. Haig's campaign. Most of the people around him, Juliet, must have known that they were in for a drubbing. He managed to hide it. Did the rest as well?
Well, I'm here at a golf club in Mr. Haig's constituency, which the local Tory party activists are using as their base for tonight. Now, they, like you, have been able to see the exit polls, and you'd think they might be rather depressed, but in actual fact, they tell me they're in buoyant mood still, and they seem to be having a good time here. Of course, they've got no worries in Richmond itself, because it is a very safe seat for Mr. Haig, over 10,000 majority. He isn't yet here himself, but his staff tell me that he himself, too, is in very good humour. He's at his house, not many miles away, with Fionn, of course, and other members of his family, and we're told Seb Coe's with them, too. They've decided not to open the wine yet, and they're not even watching television, which I think is a little surprising, but apparently he is in good spirits. Remember, he said all the way through this, he isn't taking any notice of the opinion polls, not even taking any notice of the television programmes, by the sounds of it at the minute. Presumably he'll tune in later on.
So he theoretically, you're telling me, he hasn't got a clue at the moment what the likely outcome of this election is, apart from his own instinct. Is that right? I can hardly believe it, but if you tell me that's the case, it has to be.
I find it a little incredible as well, but I've been speaking to people, his spin doctors here, who are at the golf club, and they say they've been talking to him on the phone, and that he's decided it's too early in the evening to be tuning in to you. Perhaps he doesn't want yet to hear these results that you're giving out, but certainly I presume he will be listening later on. But no, we have to assume that he is having a family evening at the moment, that he is remaining incredibly relaxed, because remember, throughout this campaign, when we all said he must be losing it, he must be getting very depressed, he didn't seem to. People call him stubborn, they call him resilient, whatever adjective you want to use. He does seem to be able to live with the ups and downs of political life.
Juliet, we shall see him in due course. Thank you very much. And now to Sheffield Brightside, where I know David Blunkett is waiting. Good evening, Mr. Blunkett.
Good evening, Jonathan.
You've got a smile on your face. I imagine you're secretly grinning from ear to ear.
Well, there are only two things that could wipe the smile off my face. One is if Estelle Morris loses in Yardley and Birmingham. And the second is the level of the turnout, because I think all of us in politics have a very serious number of questions to answer.
On the second point, is it, do you think, because the public is sort of looking at you as the least worst option as a government and has no enthusiasm for Tony Blair, however stylish the campaign has been?
Well, I don't think it's anything to do with Tony Blair. I think people are switched off politics. They are disenchanted with representative democracy. Young people in particular don't see it as being relevant to their lives, and in fact I've written to your daughter Kitty about this. It does seem to me that we need to address
that. That's because just in case anyone is totally confused about it, it's because she wrote an article in a newspaper saying why she had great difficulty deciding who to choose to vote for.
That's
right. Personal. We'll not go down that road too far.
No, we won't, but let me just put it this way. In the next 5 years, rejoicing as we will, I mean, if we've got a majority greater than Margaret Thatcher's in 1983, for a full second term for the first time in our history, if we put behind us the notion that Britain want £20 billion worth of cuts in public services, we've got to rejoice, we've got to be happy, but then we've got to draw breath and we've got to decide how to re-engage with people in civil society, in their own lives. Now, I've made 1 or 2 speeches that didn't get reported in the general election. I don't intend to make that
poor old you, don't make it now.
In your programme tonight, but I do think, although we can't address those issues in a 4-week general election, we'd be very foolish indeed if we didn't take the signals and we didn't take that message very seriously.
That's very, very interesting what you're saying. And just on the point, the first point you made about Estelle Morris, who is in what could be a marginal seat for her on a bad night, would you like to see her succeed you as Secretary of State for Education?
Oh, I think I've made my position abundantly clear. I think Estelle Morris is a star. I think she'd be wonderful in whatever job Tony Blair gave her. I know she could engage the teaching profession better than I've been able to do in the endeavour to raise standards. I'm just praying that the Liberal Democrats, they've got a millionaire standing against poured a massive amount of money in before the general election started.
One more question.
I'm really, really worried for her.
Well, we will be following that seat, obviously, very closely. You say she'll be a star. Maybe she will or won't be Secretary of State for Education. Will you be a star if you go to the Home Office?
Well, time will tell. Time will tell later tomorrow whether I am at the Home Office. And then, of course, the real task begins. Everybody's called it not a bed of nails, but a graveyard for politicians. We'll have to see.
David Blunkett, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's a very confident David Blunkett. He's going to the Home Office.
He's going to the Home Office. He came very close to confirming it. It's interesting, isn't it? He's already been asked. He's got to be asked, because for these big appointments, if he was against that idea, the Prime Minister would have to know that. They would have to discuss this beforehand. Very interesting about Estelle Morris, isn't it? I mean, he's also virtually saying he would expect her to take over as Education Secretary. She's a school standards minister. They've obviously worked very well together. They're obviously, you know, support each other. But he is saying virtually why she'd be good as Education Secretary.
But very interesting things, too, that he was saying about the turnout. I mean, the most serious remarks about it we've heard so far, in real, genuine concern about the problem of democracy.
Yes, and I think we'll hear much more of that. But, of course, people say, you know, we must re-engage, we must link up with people. But one of the reasons why people don't vote is because they don't find it exciting. It's not exciting because they don't think their life is going to come to an end or be radically altered by the vote. So they can't have it both ways, politicians.
OK, we'll pursue that some more. Now, during this campaign, it was interrupted by some very nasty scenes of racial violence in Oldham. Up there now in Oldham West, in the constituency of Oldham West, is Colin Baker. Colin, how's that playing into this election night, if at all?
I think we're going to find out within the next couple of hours, Jonathan, just exactly what impact that has had. We've got 2 counts here at the Civic Centre. Oldham West to my right, that's going to be a fairly safe seat again for Michael Meacher. He's got a majority of around about 16,000, just over. And one suspects that he, like a lot of people here tonight, will be watching just to see what the race card has done in not just his constituency, but in Oldham East.
Is it true, Colin, that, sorry to interrupt you, is it true that the council has said that because of the risk of violence, that the candidates are not going to be able to, and the victor, whoever it is, not going to be able to speak at the end in the traditional way?
More or less. It's being couched in a fairly subtle diplomatic language, that in the interest of not having any disruption and for greater efficiency, the candidates will be asked not to make any remarks, any comments. I think there was an incident last year during the local elections when a BNP candidate stood, and that ended up in a little bit of fisticuffs, and someone was taken away by the police. There was actually a demonstration outside by the Anti-Nazi League a short time ago. One person arrested there as the BNP party were coming in. As I say, we've got 2 candidates standing there. Interesting to see what the guests in the studio will be talking about later in the evening. If there is what we think will be a move towards the BNP, may not be a lot, but I suspect that they came here believing that they might be losing their deposit. One suspects that they might be feeling a bit more confident now that the money's probably safe.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. We'll be back to hear more from that. And now we can go to that party in Westminster where, appropriately, Lord Taylor is there waiting. Lord Taylor, you probably just heard that in Oldham. The fear is there might be a move towards the BNP. You were very critical of Mr. Hague's attitude during the campaign. What's your comment on this generally?
Well,
I want the Conservative Party to be more inclusive, to welcome more ethnic minorities, more women candidates, younger people, but especially, obviously my concern is for the ethnic minorities. We seem to alienate them by various speeches and various policies. And, you know, black and Asian people vote. The Conservative Party needs to remember that.
Now, you're on the Liberal wing of your party. Given this almost certain catastrophe, do you think the party's got to totally rethink what it is and where it has to go?
Well, it's only, it's early in the night, isn't it? So anything could happen, but it doesn't look particularly good for the Conservatives. I do think they need to look again at the future of the party to become more welcoming to ethnic minorities. They've got to.
Lord Taylor, thank you very much. Now to Hamilton South, where we're about to get the result. They're not quite ready yet. This was a safe seat for George Robertson. Here is the result.
Please. Here is the result for the Hamilton South parliamentary constituency. The number of votes cast for each candidate is as follows. Georgina Mitchell, Scottish Socialist Party, 1,187. Janice Elizabeth Murdoch, United Kingdom Independence Party, 151. John Oswald, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 2,381. Neil Richardson, Scottish Conservative and Unionist candidate, 1,876. Bill Tynan, Scottish Labour Party candidate, 15,965. And John Gordon Wilson, the Scottish National Party, 5,190. And I declare that Bill Tynan is duly elected to serve.
That will be reassuring for Labour. Labour with 15,965 votes. The SNP, which in the by-election, which put Mr Wilson in there, pressed Labour very, very hard. Wilson pressed Tynan very, very hard. Anyway, they've dropped right back now to 5,190. Liberal Democrats, 2,381. The Conservatives on 1,876. A majority there for Labour, 10,775. And a swing from Labour to SNP, relatively slight, 3.9%. Here's the share of the vote from the last election. 59.7% for Labour, 19.4% SNP, Liberal Democrats 8.9%, Conservatives on 7%, and the change in the share of the vote, from 1997, that is, Labour down 5.9%, the SNP up 1.8%, Liberal Democrats on 3.8%, Conservatives down 1.6%. So that's Hamilton South. Colin Rallings, can you give us a steer on that?
Yet again, a safe Labour seat. Jonathan, they're not in any trouble. The change in their share of the vote caused as much by low turnout as by a real move away from the party. But as you said, this was a seat where the SNP ran them very close in the by-election. I guess the SNP thought that they might do rather better than this. They've fallen back, only increased their share of the vote by just 2%. But again, look at the Conservatives. Here is a seat in Scotland. They've got no MPs in Scotland. Their share of the vote is even less than it was in 1997. Conservatives in Scotland, hoping to get back like Malcolm Rifkin, will find this very depressing.
That means it's almost certain, unless something dramatic happens, that Sir Malcolm will be out. Indeed, there won't be any Tory seats yet again in Scotland. No one seat out of those 72.
It looks that way. I mean, it is early days yet, and different seats behave in different ways because of the pattern of competition. But again, as I was saying about Sunderland South, the Conservatives need to get extra votes everywhere, whether they're safe seats or whether they're real Conservative targets, to show that they're on their way back. In Hamilton South, they haven't done it no more than they did in Sunderland.
So our first two results are confirming so far the impression of the exit poll.
That's absolutely right, Jonathan, but we really do need to wait for those marginals, which we hope will be coming up soon, to see what happens when the parties are in big competition with each other. In the safe seats, the result is known, the turnout drops.
Absolutely. We insist on reminding ourselves that that is only an exit poll. Until we have a really significant number of real results, we can't say whether that is true or not true, on or off target. John Sargent, pick up, if you would, on what John Taylor was saying, because he was clearly conceding defeat and talking about the party being more inclusive. It had to be more inclusive, clearly, if it was going to attract.
This is going to be the central problem for the Conservatives, and probably why they've done so badly is that they simply haven't resolved their internal problems. Not just over Europe, but over all sorts of issues. They're not coherent, and they haven't really decided whether or not they do want to be more welcoming to ethnic minorities, and Lord Taylor's point is well made there, or whether they want to maintain the position, which they did during the campaign, of being essentially a party on the right. They vacated a large area of the centre ground to Labour. This was apparently because their pollsters were telling them, don't fight in the centre ground because you'll lose. But they've ended up being pushed right to the margin, and that's one of the reasons why they've done so badly.
A very interesting comment on turnout here from Tam Diel, who's likely to return to the House and, after the departure of Edward Heath, become the father of the House in the next Parliament. He says that he blamed partly Labour's campaign, and I quote him, as reported, I'm absolutely dismayed about the turnout. I think the profession of politics has been demeaned by the nature of the campaign.
Yes, I think what Tam Diel's talking about there is the extent to which all the parties now do this amazing amount of research into public opinion before the campaign starts. They identify what they think are their strong messages that the public appear to like, and then they concentrate on those messages. In the old days, if you remember, people simply said, oh, well, I'll tell you about all our policies. We'll have one day on foreign affairs, one day on home affairs, and that's how the parties would react, but not anymore, and that's what annoys people like Tam Diel.
Down now to Dermot, where he can show us what the House of Commons is likely to look like. He's right in there. Dermot.
Well, Jonathan, this, of course, is what tonight's all about. Who controls the House of Commons and will be forming the next government of the United Kingdom? Now, let's go inside this magnificent building, the Palace of Westminster itself. The House of Commons and the Lords we've seen date from 1834, when they were rebuilt after a fire. These, the lobbies, where MPs gather before they enter the main Commons chamber. And here is our House of Commons chamber. Over here are the government benches, this side, the opposition. Now, normally, of course, 659 MPs sit and stand here. It would be packed to the rafters, of course, if they all turned up. Let's bring them in here now. This, the government side, of course, and we're predicting it will be populated by the Labour Party with 421 MPs. What about the opposition? How many for Mr Hague and the Tories? A fall to about 150, based, of course, on our exit poll. These figures could go up or down. The Liberal Democrats, we're predicting a very good night for them, for Charles Kennedy and his team. 58 MPs for the Liberal Democrats. And the others, the parties from Northern Ireland, Plaid Cymru and the Scottish Nationalists, should have about 30 MPs between them. So how does this number of seats, these 421 MPs for the Labour Party, how does that translate into a majority? 183, a slight increase from 1997. Now, they've never, ever had this number of MPs, so clearly, Jonathan, history in the making.
Absolutely. Now, I don't want to blind you with figures, but just a couple more on the back of what Dermot was just saying. If there are 421 seats, as the exit poll is suggesting, it would be Labour's highest number ever. The Conservatives, we're predicting 150, would be the worst ever for the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Democrats on 58 would be the best since 1929. I think we can go up now to Scotland and see Charles Kennedy leaving his house. He's about to go from his house anyway. There, indeed, he is, leaving his house, getting in his car, on the way to his count. Charles Kennedy looking a happy man, as well he should, on the basis of our exit poll, John.
Yes, he's done extremely well. I think one of the reasons is, I sort of said to him, why have you done so well? Because in the Commons, he often is very disappointing at Prime Minister's questions. And he said, there are two things I think I do well. One is media events, and the other is meeting people. So you asked me to do that for 4 weeks, and I'm very happy. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. He's very good at short interviews, long interviews, not very good at speeches, but peculiarly suited to a modern campaign.
There were lots of people who were rather patronising about him, you know, comparing him with Paddy Ashdown, the great commando, thinking he wouldn't be able to stick the long campaign, that he'd get tired or he'd get bored, and that he didn't actually even like being leader. He really has, has he not, confounded those critics?
He used to look unhappy. That was one of the problems. You'd see him in the House of Commons before Prime Minister's questions, and he would stand up. People would think, this man is at the dentist. He's not, in fact, going to speak to the Commons. This is sort of awful. It's unfair. And I think that was created a lot of morale problems on his own side when it didn't go very well. But of course, the moment he begins to shine, it's always the old case. Nothing succeeds like success in politics.
Now, it's clear that he didn't get one of the key things he wanted. At one point, they were saying, if we don't have proportional representation or a promise of a referendum on it, no deals with Labour. That was the position, you know, at the beginning of the last Parliament. They've gone very quiet on the need for proportional representation, but we're not at all clear, perhaps you are, on whether there's going to be a continuation of the relationship.
Well, there'll be some continuation of the relationship, and of course, if there's a single currency referendum, a referendum on the euro, then of course the relationship will be extremely close because the Liberal Democrats will campaign strongly for the single currency more than any other party. But part of this is Charles Kennedy simply saying these issues are boring, these issues of PR and fair votes and so on, and if you go on about it too much, you switch people off. That's why he's concentrated on health and education and being caught up in the Labour slipstream to great effect.
But the idea that Paddy Ashdown once said, my successor will be in the cabinet, I mean, that's out of court now, isn't it?
Yes, that's completely gone, because of course that was the old idea, that what you do is you hope that there's going to be a close result, and then you come in because you give Labour third-party insurance, it was sometimes called. But with these big majorities, that's ridiculous. There's no question of that. Tony Blair doesn't need help from anybody except his own backbenchers if they bother to turn up sometimes.
Talking about Tony Blair, you're mentioning his own backbenchers, saying there's a sort of view that Tony Blair, I mean, the critics have said that Tony Blair doesn't exactly have the greatest respect for Parliament, only goes there when he has to, once a week on Wednesday for the knockabout, and cancelling the Tuesday and Thursday Prime Minister's question times.
Yes, I think some of that's a bit overdone. They've done a great analysis of how many speeches he's made, but I think there's a sense in which he wants to get on with the job.
OK, now up to Scotland, where I can see Bernard Ponsonby. What have you got for us, Bernard?
Well, Jonathan, of course, we've only got that one Scottish result, which is Hamilton South, a 3.9% swing from Labour to the SNP. If that was repeated across the country, the SNP would pick up one seat from Labour at Inverness, East Nairn and Lochaber. Well, standing by in Perth is the SNP leader, John Swinney. John Swinney, you were saying yesterday that you were predicting a bigger percentage share of the vote and indeed more seats. Will your percentage share be near the 29% that you got at the Scottish parliamentary elections in '99?
Well, I'm very confident the SNP share of the vote is going to increase tonight, Bernard, and I think that's a result of the strong campaign that we've fought and the message that we've given to people in Scotland that the SNP is the only party that can stand for Scotland at Westminster. I think that's got through and will boost our share of the vote in the election tonight.
Well, of course, you're standing there in Perth where there are two constituencies counting, North Tayside and Perth, both former Conservative seats, and the polls all being very depressing for the Conservatives. Are you confident that you'll hold both of those seats tonight? Because, of course, two new candidates, yourself and Rosanna Cunningham, not standing for Westminster.
Yes, I'm very confident that we will hold all the seats that the SNP won in 1997. Very confident, and we'll put in an effort across the rest of the country to ensure that the SNP makes further political progress. Obviously, we have to wait to see how far that progress goes tonight, but I'm very confident about our prospects tonight and very pleased with the campaign that we fought.
Well, it is very early days yet, but that turnout in Hamilton South was 57%. It was 71% in the same constituency in 1997. Hamilton South, a constituency which normally votes along the Scottish average in terms of turnout. Is this a worrying factor, low turnout?
Well, low turnout, wherever it is a worrying factor, Bernard. You know, I'm a politician who wants people to be engaged in the political process, and our efforts are designed to encourage and motivate people to come out to vote. And I think what you'll find is that in the more marginal areas of the country, the turnout is considerably higher than the figure that you've suggested there, that you've reported from Hamilton. But politicians have got to take careful heed of turnout and make sure that we provide the direction and the inspiration to voters to come out to vote. And I think the SNP's had a strong message to do that.
We'll keep an eye on those marginals. That's the SNP leader, John Swinney. With that, back to Jonathan in London.
Bernard, thank you very much. We can go to Wales now to find out what is happening there, where Tim Rogers is in Cardiff. Tim, what's the sense of what's happening in Wales?
Well, the sense here, Jonathan, is that there's right across the country, of course, we've been seeing this reports about a very low turnout, and that seems to be the case here as well. The picture generally is that we believe that Labour, who control the overwhelming majority of seats in Wales, will do so tomorrow morning as well, although there is a suggestion that Plaid Cymru, the Nationalists, might have done well in one of two key seats at Carmarthen East in West Wales, and there's even a suggestion this evening that they may even have done pretty well at Conwy in North Wales, which was a four-way split, but we're waiting to hear more about that later.
Tim, just on that, our exit poll, the analysts have come up with the view that Plaid Cymru, on the basis of the exit poll, of course, will win 5 seats in this election, which would be very good for them, wouldn't it?
It would be very good indeed. Of course, the key for Plaid Cymru is to try and break through into the valleys areas. Now, we're not saying at the moment here, and even Plaid Cymru aren't saying that they've achieved that. They certainly hope that they will have done, because if they do that, that will be a significant step forward for them, and it will really be a major headline of the evening, if you like. If they can take one of the key Labour seats in the valleys from Labour, seats which have been Labour since the dawn of time, in effect, it really would be extraordinary. Now, nobody's predicting that at this stage. Plaid Cymru hope that they will have done. The key there, as with many other areas, could be turnout, but we have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Tim, thank you very much. And just while we're on the nationalists in Scotland as well, we were just hearing from Bernard Ponsonby, who was talking to the SNP leader. We are predicting on the basis of the exit poll, stress again on the exit poll only, we're predicting that SNP will win 7 seats. That would be 1 up from 97. And I should say Plaid Cymru altogether 5 seats, which would be up 1 from the last election. Just to get it right. Plaid Cymru, our exit poll is saying 5 seats, up 1 from the last election. SNP, 7 seats, also up 1 from the last election. Now for a roundup of the results to the results centre and Mary Nightingale.
John, we've got more detail on the results in so far. Only 3 so far, so very early days. But let's start with Sunderland South. Now, this one's a Labour hold. This was the first to declare in record time. Chris Mullin, junior minister. But there was nonetheless a swing from Labour to Conservative. They had a majority of 13,667, but they did lose some ground to the Conservatives. Now, moving on to Hamilton South. This was the second to declare, again a Labour hold. George Robertson's old seat, this, now being held by Labour to Tynan. Majority 10,775, swing from Labour to the SNP, though, of 3.9%. So Labour did lose some ground to the SNP. And finally, for the moment, Sunderland North, again a Labour hold, majority of 13,354. Bill Etherington, swing Labour to Conservatives, though, nonetheless, 3.4%. So, as I said, 3 safe Labour seats, too early to draw any real conclusions. Back to you, Jonathan.
Mary, thank you. Now just take stock of where we are on the basis of combination of the exit poll and these very few early results in the results centre. Colin Rallings, what are you making of it?
Well, we've seen nothing yet, Jonathan, in these safe seats to suggest that the exit poll has got it wildly wrong. These are safe Labour seats, as we've said. The Labour vote is down as we would perhaps expect. It has tended to drift to minor parties rather than to be the benefit of the Conservatives, and turnout, of course, is down dramatically throughout. One point I did miss earlier on when talking about Hamilton South, and I think a minor significance, is the Conservatives actually dropped into 4th place behind the Liberal Democrats, which I think speaks volumes to the parlous state of the Conservative Party north of the border.
Can you make a judgment on how the Liberal Democrats are going to north of the border, if they're going to make waves there as they are clearly making waves, or likely to make waves in England?
It's difficult to do so because the constituencies in Scotland are very different. This seat in Hamilton South is in the Scottish sort of central belt, very sort of industrial, sort of old Labour area, whereas the Liberal Democrats' best territory tends to be in some of the more rural and highland areas. But any seat in which they can increase their share of the vote, especially an unpromising seat like Hamilton South, suggests that the Liberal Democrats are attracting more voters, perhaps voters who are a little disappointed with the Labour government, perhaps voters who might on other occasions have voted the SNP, and that will give them heart.
Colin, thank you very much. We can go to Hartlepool now, Peter Mandelson's seat, where I can see Robert Moore there at the count. Have you had any contact with Peter Mandelson or his people today?
No sign of Peter Mandelson here yet. We're expecting a declaration within half an hour or so from about now. Peter Mandelson, of course, the man with the dubious and legendary fame of having resigned from the cabinet twice in the lifespan of a single parliament. But I think his career as a backbench MP would be relatively safe. They're anticipating, I think, a clear majority, if a reduced one. And even though this has perhaps not been a close contest as we anticipated, it's certainly been a colourful one. We've got a Tory candidate here who's an ex-boxing promoter, and of course we've got Arthur Scargill here standing as the Socialist Labour candidate. So in a sense that's been an irresistible part of the campaign here. Peter Mandelson, the Prince of New Labour, pitted against the King of Old Labour, Arthur Scargill.
Yeah, it sounds like a great campaign, and there was a time when people thought that Peter Mandelson would be very unpopular in his constituency for a whole range of reasons. The allegations against him, the fact that he was forced to resign, or was sacked, and that Arthur Scargill might pick up votes in an old Labour seat. But that was actually really missing the point, wasn't it? So it
I think
appears, anyway.
This was always going to be a safe This was always going to be a safe Labour seat, I think, for Peter Mandelson. There has been some hostility, but I think his future as a backbench MP is secure. But precisely what his political profile will be in another Labour government is not clear. I think obviously people here are saying that Tony Blair won't be in a rush whatsoever to bring him back into cabinet, but he may play, for example, a significant role in terms of drumming up support in a future Euro referendum campaign, because of course Peter Mandelson is a keen Euro enthusiast.
Thank you very much, Robert Moore. And now up to, from Peter Mandelson's constituency to Dunfermline East, the constituency of Gordon Brown. You, Chancellor, are a very prudent, very cautious fellow, but you are thrilled inside by this campaign and result that we're projecting, I guess.
Yes, it was a historic victory in 1997, and it seems to be being reaffirmed. It seems to be being reaffirmed, and let's wait and see. I haven't had my own parliamentary result yet, but it looks as if we have won the battle of ideas as well as the battle of votes.
Did you think that it was your campaign what did it?
I think it's people saying that we started a lot in the last 4 years. They want us to continue. In fact, they want us to get down to work immediately, I think, to invest in the public services, to move towards greater employment opportunity for people, to tackle child and pensioner poverty. All these things were mentioned to me during this campaign in every part of the country, and I believe people are satisfied that we started the job, but they do want us to continue with it. And our strategy as a campaign, of course, was to emphasise the economy and public services. We did that throughout, and I had the privilege of being very much part of the centre of that campaign.
And throughout, you managed to avoid answering a question, which was, were you prepared, if necessary, to raise the ceiling of national insurance contributions? Now you are a free man, Chancellor. You can tell us now, because there's no risk in the answer.
Look, I'm not going to write a budget even at 11 o'clock on Thursday night, and I'm not going to do it despite the kind invitation you're giving me. These are matters for budgets.
I understand that. Another issue of great importance is the European single currency and the referendum. We know that you're going to make your famous assessment of the 5 tests within the first 2 years. If the answer to that is we can go for it, how long after that would you hope to be able to hold a referendum?
Look, that's a matter for the Cabinet. We will look at these matters in the first 2 years. I think I've been right in what I did in 1997 to suggest, as I and Tony Blair did, that we should look at this matter in the new Parliament, but it should be based on an economic assessment. That will be rigorous, it will be published, people will see the results, then the country will want to have a debate on these, whichever the results are, and of course if it is a positive assessment then there would be a referendum, but I can't give you a timescale for that.
Just on the other issue which has been exercising us so far this evening, which is the turnout, it does say something either about the Labour Party or politics generally, that you appear to be having a landslide of seats on possibly the lowest turnout since 1918.
Well, this is a trend, you know, not just in Britain, but in the Western democracies. We saw it in America a few months ago. We've seen it in other countries in Europe. It is something that all of us will want to look at. But I think you can see that where people think that the result is decided, where they think the choice has already been made, they tend not to vote in such huge numbers. Where these are closer contests tonight, I think there are higher polls taking place. But of course this is something we all want to look at. But I don't think anything that we discuss about the turnout should diminish from the fact that we are winning the battle of ideas in this country. This is the first election that I can remember, and I've fought many in the last 20 years, where the sheer dominance of the issue of public services, building on the foundation of a strong economy, has been what the voters want to talk about and they want to see enacted.
But one more thing just on that turnout. If we're right, in your own constituency, the turnout is down from 70% you got last time round to, I think, 57% this time. Now, that isn't just a sort of... I'm not saying that that's peculiar to your constituency, but that isn't just a general trend of Western democracies. It's dramatic fall, isn't it?
Well, actually, we had Scottish parliamentary elections 2 years ago, and I think the turnout was less. I do think that there is an issue when people feel that the result is decided about whether they do come out and vote, and perhaps where the contests are closer in other constituencies, the poll is actually higher. But obviously, we want more people to vote, and it's something particularly amongst young people we're going to have to look at in future years. But I do say to you, Jonathan, that should not diminish from the very big gap of advantage that the Labour Party seems to have in this constituency and elsewhere over a Conservative Party that seems to have the worst results since 1832.
One last thought. Do you recognise that although you have said that the public services are vital, this time you really have to deliver, otherwise you will incur the wrath of the electorate in 4 or 5 years' time?
We have a duty to discharge. The money is now increasingly there. There are rapid expansions in the amount of money available for education, health, indeed policing and transport over the next few years. I believe it is a test of the public services, but I believe the public services, with the reforms we're bringing in, are in a position to respond.
And
so yes, we will do better.
And do you hope to be Chancellor as we go into the next election?
Well, that is not a matter for me. As you know, the British political system, the choice is in the hands of the Prime Minister.
I thought that might be a question you wouldn't answer. Gordon Brown, thank you very much for joining us this evening. John, what did you make of that?
Well, you've got a smile at the end, but it is extraordinary, isn't it? John Prescott, first of all, looking very solemn and terribly responsible. Gordon Brown, I suppose, typically not showing his emotion, but he's a very, very important figure. The most powerful Chancellor in recent years, a significant player, obviously, in the day-to-day management of the government, but also the man behind the strategy for this election campaign, which has proved so amazingly successful, and yet he still looks rather solemn.
I know, but it is calculated to mean they always said there's a contrast between the private Gordon Brown and the public Gordon Brown.
Yes, in private, you hear this enormous laugh endlessly going on. Very witty man, and very ready to relax, but in public, almost feeling he has to play this role of the person who's not affected by emotion.
Okay, we now go up to Edinburgh Pentlands, where I can see, forgive me, a rather sombre-looking Sir Malcolm Rifkin. No, he's smiling now.
Not sombre at all. Not sombre at all.
Now, I know we haven't got the count in, but given our exit poll and what happened in Hamilton South, you always knew it would be a big struggle to win back the seat you lost in '97. What do you reckon your chances are?
Well, there's little doubt there's a substantial swing to the Conservatives in Pentlands. I'm not going to try and give you figures at the moment because that would be dangerous and unwise. But I'm tremendously heartened by what I've seen so far. And I think we should wait very carefully.
That sounds as if you're saying you think there might be enough votes to make up the deficit. I mean, you would have to get.
I wouldn't be making the remarks that I am if I didn't think so.
Sorry?
I say I wouldn't be responding to you in the way that I am if I was not very comfortable with what I've been saying so far.
Well, that would be a tribute to your resolve by the view of anyone in politics, because most people said you were barking to go back in there again after the '97 defeat.
I had some sympathy with that observation, but sometimes a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
Let me ask you more broadly, Sir Malcolm, assuming that our exit poll isn't way out, it is a pretty disastrous night for your party.
Well, again, I think we have to wait and see. The various polls that I've seen in the last few days about what was going to happen in Pentlands are clearly way off the mark. Who knows, the same may be true of the country as a whole.
We will be back with you, Sir Malcolm, to see what your result is, I hope, and maybe talk to you after it. Thank you very much for joining us.
Certainly.
Lots of counting going on there, as you can see up here on our monitor all over the place. This looks like Torbay, which of course is a key seat. It's just held by the Liberal Democrats. They have a 12-vote majority here, and we are getting quite close to the count, we think is about 2 minutes away now. Everyone is going to be watching this seat very closely indeed, because it will be a very good indicator of whether our prediction about the votes and the seats that the Liberal Democrats are going to get, our prediction being 58, is in line with what is actually happening. It's a very critical seat. It's always been a very dramatic seat, John, too.
Yes, it's a key result here, because once we have got some idea of how well the Liberal Democrats are doing in the southwest, a great part of the election jigsaw can then be filled in. But this is a vital result because, of course, if the Liberal Democrats were to lose this seat, that would be a sort of catastrophic blow. But remember, I mean, we're saying this now, but 4 years ago we were saying, oh, the Liberal Democrats will never do as well as this again for a long time, and didn't Paddy Ashdown fight a fantastic campaign? But here in Torbay, as we're seeing, we're now confident the Liberal Democrats are going to win.
Of course, on paper, Adrian Saunders, who's the Conservative candidate, only needs to get 7 votes over and above to put down the Liberal Democrat. But we'll see. Colin Rallings, can you put in context the result here with our exit poll?
I can, Jonathan. The exit poll is suggesting that there will be quite a sharp swing from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats, and that would mean that Adrian Sanders would hold on in Torbay, which he won by merely 12 votes last time, with a much increased majority. But I think one of the things that we're going to find this evening in these seats like Torbay in the southwest is that they're not all going to behave the same. And this always makes predicting the number of seats the Liberal Democrats are going to win very difficult indeed. The Liberal Democrats in Torbay have fallen back in some senses in the last few years. They didn't do very well in the council elections in 2000, and they were roundly defeated even by the UKIP, UK Independence Party, in the 1999 Euro election. So Conservatives in Torbay, I think, would be rather more buoyant than perhaps in some other areas of the southwest. And if the Liberal Democrats win and win well in Torbay, then that's great news for them. However, if the Conservatives were to get Torbay back, I don't think that would necessarily mean that the Conservatives would win back all that territory that they lost to the Liberal Democrats in 1997.
Incidentally, we're not merely giving a promotion to Torbay's summer breaks on the Riviera. We're actually waiting because we think the result is very close with us. I bet Torbay hopes it is going to be like that, particularly after the foot and mouth outbreak, right, which John has significantly affected the West Country as well, of course, as up in Cumbria.
It has. It's obviously had a terrible effect in many areas, but whether or not that will show politically is something we'll be looking tonight to see, but it may not. I mean, the whole of this election really turns on, okay, so if Labour, you criticise Labour, then are you suggesting that the Tories would do better? It's always that comparison between Tony Blair and William Hague, and that's what's making it so difficult for voters up and down the country to, if you like, demonstrate their dissatisfaction and disappointment with the government. And obviously, there's a lot of that about.
Colin, given the closeness of the result here, are we going to learn anything about whether or not tactical voting is taking place?
I think we may well, Jonathan. The important thing for the Liberal Democrats in Torbay is to hold on, and I think they'd accept, given that sort of slight shift at the local and Euro level to the Conservatives, is that they need to wooed over local Labour supporters. If they've managed to do so in Torbay, then I think that would suggest that in a range of other seats around and about there, like Teambridge and Totnes and Dorset West, which will be coming in later in the evening, that would give heart to the Liberal Democrats that Labour supporters in the current context were prepared to vote for them to get the Conservatives out, in much the same way as happened in many seats in 1997.
Colin, I'm going to have a word quickly in a moment with Caroline Kerr, but just before I go, do you expect to see, given what we've said about these 58 seats, do you expect to see different kinds of majority in different parts of the country for the Liberal Democrats, or when we get the Torbay result, will we be able to go from that, say, yeah, this looks as if they're going to get the lot?
I'm always cautious about making predictions about the Liberal Democrats, Jonathan. They're a strange party. They target where they campaign. You don't only see Charles Kennedy's national campaign. If you go into the constituencies, they saturate the area with workers. They choose some constituencies to do that, and other ones which are next door and look to you and me exactly the same. In psephological terms, how they're balanced, they perhaps leave alone. But I think certainly they want to hold on to Torbay for Adrian Sanders. They want to gain other seats in the southwest. If they get a sign of tactical voting in Torbay, they'll be very optimistic.
Colin, thank you very much. Now, the Liberal Democrat headquarters are in a restaurant in Hyde Park, and Caroline Kerr is there with the big Liberal Democrat sign behind them, and lots of people behind you attentively watching this programme. What's the feeling there, Caroline?
Well, there's a great level of anticipation of the Torbay result. There is great hope here that they will hold on to Torbay, that they know that they hold it absolutely on a knife edge. It's just 12 votes which gave them their majority last time. They're also, I think, rather heartened to hear David Blunkett's concern that Estelle Morris might lose her seat in Birmingham. Their own officials, the Liberal Democrats who are conducting their own exit polls there, say that they think they have quite a good chance of wrenching that seat from Labour.
And are they picking up, and are they think that our 58 exit poll is 58 seats from the exit poll is the kind of thing that is likely? You heard Colin saying that he's on target for it, but he's very cautious because things can go each way so easily in these Conservative, Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Conservative marginals.
Absolutely. I think there's a huge degree of caution here tonight. There is a hope that our exit poll is correct, but I think that they hardly can believe it themselves, so they're certainly not banking on it.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Now, Conservative Party headquarters, Martin Bashir has been with Bill Roache, the famous Coronation Street actor, and talking to him. Wonder what he said. Perhaps we can find out right now.
This is a disaster for the Conservatives.
No, I don't think it's a disaster. It's pretty much the status quo and what's been predicted all along. And also, we haven't had all the results in yet. There's a lot of marginals that can be a bit different. I think what will happen if Labour get in again, they'll have a very rough ride. They inherited a good economy last time. This time it'll be their own, and there's a tough time coming.
Do you think that Mr Hague can survive as leader in the light of this result?
Yes, most certainly I do. I think he's done a brilliant campaign. He's a very good leader, and we've got now to really pick up, get going, and I think he'll become Prime Minister eventually. I'm absolutely convinced.
You say he's a great leader, but obviously the British people don't feel similarly.
Yes, well, thanks to the media. Quite honestly, they've had a totally negative thing about William. They've never shown his positive side. Everyone who's met him, watch him on the Dimblebys, watch him on Prime Minister's Question Time. He's quite brilliant, and he's a great man, but the media have totally suppressed everything about him. And I thought the front on one of the papers, they say that, put the sign on where the cloth is or something, is typical of the sort of thing they've been doing to him. He's a much greater man than that, and he will be seen to be in time to come.
Bill Roache, a lot of enthusiasm for William Hague in what appears to be, if our exit poll is right, his great plight. The big story of tonight, our exit poll projecting a massive victory for Labour again, a historic victory and a historic defeat for the Conservatives.